Why overthinkers lose people. They never argued with. There's a message on your phone that has been open for 9 minutes. 3 sentences, nothing hostile, nothing urgent. Someone asked you a simple question and you have already written a reply, deleted it, written a softer version, deleted that one too, and now you are reading their words a 4th time to check whether the tone shifted between the 2nd line and the 3rd. You are studying the punctuation. You are weighing the absence of a greeting. The room around you is quiet. The day is entirely ordinary. Nothing at all is wrong, and yet your chest is performing the full physical work of a crisis. 9 minutes becomes an hour. The hour becomes the evening, and the evening becomes a decision to answer properly tomorrow, when there is more space, when you can give it the attention it deserves. Tomorrow arrives and the message has aged. Now a plain reply would look strange, so it requires a small explanation for the delay, and the explanation needs to sound relaxed rather than apologetic, and constructing that costs more energy than you currently have. So it waits again. And on the other side of that silence, a person who liked you a great deal begins, slowly and without any drama, to conclude that you did not care enough to answer. The usual name for this is anxiety. Some would call it overthinking, as though the problem were merely volume, as though the correction were fewer thoughts. Others would tell you that you are too sensitive or too careful or too far inside your own head. There are books that will instruct you to be more spontaneous and friends who will instruct you to stop worrying, and none of that makes contact with the actual structure of the problem. This is not an excess of thought. It is a form of attention so intense that it never manages to arrive anywhere. You are not absent from these relationships. You are working harder inside them than almost anyone around you. The work simply never reaches the person it was built for. 3 things get traced here: the exact mechanism that converts thought into distance, the place it was built, and the reason it once kept you safe, and what it costs now. In the specific currency of people who stopped reaching out, people who never explained why, people who left without leaving behind a single argument you could point to. The thing that has been quietly ending your relationships has never once looked like conflict. That is precisely why it has gone uncorrected for so long, and why the last part of this matters more than the diagnosis. The argument that never happened. Consider the endings you have actually lived through, not the loud ones, the other kind. There was a friend who used to text every week, and then every month, and then only on your birthday, and then not at all. There was someone close to you who moved you from the center of their life to the outer edge of it so gradually that there is no moment you can identify as the moment it changed. There was a person you loved who said, somewhere near the end, that they never really knew what was going on inside you, and you remember feeling genuinely bewildered by that sentence because you had thought about them almost constantly for years. Nothing broke. There was no betrayal, no shouting, no line that got crossed. That is the part that keeps you awake at 2 a.m. When a relationship ends in conflict, you are handed a story. There was a fight, an act of dishonesty, a specific injury with a date attached, and the story gives you something with edges to grieve. You can be furious. You can be at fault. You can replay the scene and rewrite your lines 100 times. Painful as it is, a rupture is legible. It can be told to other people at dinner. It can be understood by anyone who hears it. It even provides a kind of dignity, because it confirms that the relationship was real enough to break. When a relationship ends in silence, you are handed nothing. There is no scene to replay, no sentence to regret, no moment where the temperature visibly dropped. So you go searching for the injury, and you cannot locate it anywhere, and after a long enough search, something shifts in your reasoning. You stop looking for an event and start suspecting a quality. The conclusion becomes that the problem was not something you did, but something you are, in some general and permanent and unfixable way, that there is a defect in you which people detect gradually on their own schedule, and that the only reliable pattern in your life is that closeness eventually expires. Notice what that conclusion does to your behavior afterward. It makes you more careful, not less. If the defect is in your nature and reveals itself over time, then the only available defense is better management of exposure. Speak more precisely. Reveal more slowly. Give people fewer opportunities to arrive at the discovery. So each disappearance tightens the exact mechanism that produced it, and the tightening feels like maturity, and the pattern accelerates while you congratulate yourself on having learned something. That conclusion is doing you enormous damage, and it is also simply wrong. What has been happening is not general, and it is not a quality. It is mechanical. It is specific. It is repeatable. It produces the same outcome every single time it runs, and it can be described precisely enough that you will recognize the last 3 years of your life inside the description. What you call care, and what it actually does. Watch closely what you do when someone begins to matter to you. You slow down. That is the first change, and it is almost invisible from the inside. Before you speak, you begin to account for their mood, their history, their current level of exhaustion, the 7 available readings of your sentence and which of them lands worst. You do not want to burden them on a difficult day, so you wait for a better one. You do not want your problem to arrive clumsily, so you hold it until it can be presented cleanly and briefly, and without any mess attached. You do not want to ask for too much, so you ask for nothing at all and quietly hope the offer will come unprompted. Every one of those movements is care. That is exactly what makes this so difficult to see and so difficult to surrender. You are not being cold. You are not withholding out of pride or strategy or punishment. You are being so unusually careful with another human being that you remove yourself from the room they are standing in. And here is the mechanism, stated plainly. Care that remains inside your head is indistinguishable from the outside from indifference. There is no observable difference between a person who thought about someone every day for 3 weeks and said nothing, and a person who did not think about them once. Both produce identical silence. Both produce identical evidence. Both generate the same slow, quiet, unanswerable question in the other person, which is simply this: does this person actually want me here? Sit with how unfair that is, and then sit with the fact that unfairness does not change it. Other people have no access to your interior. They cannot audit your intentions. They cannot see the 4 drafts, the hour of deliberation, the genuine anxiety about getting it right. They have only what arrives, and what arrives is a gap. Take a concrete case. Someone you love loses a parent. You hear about it immediately, and you feel it immediately, in your body, the way you feel things. And then the difficulty begins, because a message about death cannot be careless. The wrong words would be an insult at the worst possible moment. So you think about what would actually help. You decide that they are being flooded with generic condolences, and that yours would only add to the pile, and that the truly considerate move is to wait until the noise dies down and then reach out properly, when it matters more. 2 weeks pass, the noise dies down, and now the reaching out has become impossible, because arriving late to a death requires explaining the lateness, and there is no explanation that does not sound like an excuse. So you say nothing, permanently. And in their memory of the worst month of their life, you are simply one of the people who did not write. That is not indifference. That is a person who cared so precisely about not doing it badly that they did not do it at all. And the 2 outcomes are recorded identically. You have been paying an enormous emotional tax for years and receiving none of the credit for it, because the payment never once left your account. The rehearsal before every sentence. Notice what happens in the seconds before you say something that matters. You draft it internally. You test the phrasing against an imagined reaction, watching their face in your mind as the words land. You adjust for the possibility that they are tired. You adjust again for the possibility that they will hear criticism where none was intended. You remember that this is the 3rd time in 2 months you have raised something difficult, and you calculate the risk of becoming, in their private ledger, a person who raises difficult things. So you revise the request to be smaller, then smaller again, and at some point the version that remains is so reduced that it no longer seems worth the trouble of saying at all. So you say nothing. The conversation moves forward, and no one present has any idea that anything occurred. That entire process is invisible. From the outside, it looks like a pause, possibly not even that. The rehearsal carries a cost that almost nobody identifies. Language edited 11 times stops sounding like a person. It sounds prepared. It arrives smooth and considered and oddly formal, with every rough edge sanded away, and the roughness was the part that made other people feel trusted. When you finally speak, they hear a statement. They do not hear a confession. They receive information about your inner life rather than access to it, and those two things produce completely different feelings in a listener. One is interesting, the other creates a bond. Intimacy is built almost entirely out of unfinished sentences. It is built out of the things said badly, the admission that arrives before it has been organized, the moment when someone tells you what frightens them while they are still working out what it is. That is the raw material. Polish is not a higher grade of the same substance. Polish is a different substance, and it does not bond to anything. There is a second cost, and it is quieter. Rehearsal consumes the emotion it was meant to carry. Say a thing 11 times inside your own head, and by the 11th pass it is cooled. The urgency has been metabolized privately. What survives is the content without the temperature, delivered by someone who now feels strangely calm about a subject that was burning an hour ago. And the listener, quite reasonably, matches the temperature they are given. They respond mildly, because mildly is what they received. And you walk away confirmed in your suspicion that people do not really take your feelings seriously. Think about the people who feel closest to you right now. They are not the ones who received your best phrasing. They are the ones who caught you mid-thought, usually by accident, usually at a bad hour, usually when you were too tired or too upset to run the process. Notice that you did not choose those moments. They happened to you. Which means that every genuine closeness in your life so far has occurred during a failure of the very system you keep improving. Why the silence reads as distance. Understand what a delay actually does to the person waiting inside it. Human beings do not experience absence as neutral. This is not a quirk of the impatient or the insecure. It is close to universal, and it is old. Absence is not read as processing, or as consideration, or as respect for someone's limited time. Absence is read as a verdict. When you do not respond, the other person does not conclude that you must be composing something thoughtful. They conclude that they are not a priority. Then they revise their model of the relationship downward to match the evidence, and the revision is almost never announced out loud. After the revision comes the adjustment. They stop initiating. Not as punishment, and usually not consciously, but out of ordinary self-protection. Because reaching towards someone who does not reach back is a specific form of humiliation that people learn to stop volunteering for. The frequency drops. The warmth drops with it. Because none of this is stated, you experience it only as a change in the weather, and you respond to the change by becoming even more careful, since the relationship now appears fragile. Look at the asymmetry between the two accounts. In your version of events, you were deeply engaged the entire time, thinking of them constantly, composing something worthy of the situation, waiting for the right conditions. In their version, you were unavailable for 3 weeks and then sent a paragraph. Both accounts are honest. Only one of them exists as evidence. There is something worse hidden inside this, which is that delay does not merely fail to communicate. It actively communicates the opposite of what you intend. Speed is the only universally legible signal of importance in a relationship. Not eloquence, not depth, not accuracy. Speed. The friend who replies in 4 minutes with 2 badly typed words has transmitted more devotion than you transmitted in 19 days of private deliberation, and they transmitted it without effort, and they will keep the friendship. This is the entire tragedy in one sentence. Your interior life is the most active part of these relationships, and it is the one part nobody else has ever been permitted to observe. If the interior work never becomes visible, then to everyone around you it did not occur. Not because they refuse to believe in it, but because they have no way of knowing there is anything there to believe in. You have been running a private economy with no exports, and then wondering why the world treats you as poor. The weight other people feel and cannot name. There is something else your carefulness transmits, and it is heavier than silence. When you monitor every word around someone, they feel monitored. Precision is contagious in a way that is very difficult to detect while it spreads. If your sentences arrive measured, theirs become measured too. If you never say the careless thing, they begin to suspect that careless things are not welcome here, and they start editing as well. Slowly, without either of you agreeing to it, without either of you noticing the moment it happened. The relationship becomes a place where two people are performing accuracy at each other. Ask what that feels like from the other chair. It feels like being liked by someone who is always slightly braced. It feels like there is a correct way to be with you, a way that produces ease and warmth, and nobody has explained what it is, so they are guessing, and the guessing is exhausting in a manner they cannot justify complaining about. It feels like they might at any moment say something that quietly costs them standing, and they will not be told when it happens, and they will detect it only later as a small cooling they cannot trace to a cause. There is another layer beneath that. Your carefulness implies a standard. When someone watches you weigh your words that closely, they assume you are weighing theirs at the same resolution and by the same criteria. Whether or not you are actually judging them is beside the point. The instrument is visible and its precision is visible, and precision in another person always reads as evaluation. Most people cannot articulate any of this. They lack the words, and even with the words, saying it aloud would sound like an accusation over nothing at all. So they say nothing. They only know that they leave your company a little tired, and that they do not know why, and that the friend who is chaotic and thoughtless and constantly says the wrong thing is somehow easier to spend a Saturday with. That comparison has probably injured you before. You have watched someone choose a shallower connection over yours and read it as proof that depth is unwanted, that people prefer the surface, that being serious is a structural disadvantage in social life. It is not that. They are not choosing shallowness over depth. They are choosing a room where they are permitted to be wrong. You would grant almost anyone that permission if they asked for it directly. That is the cruel part. The generosity is real and enormous and entirely inaccessible, because the same instrument that scans your own sentences is visibly scanning theirs, and they can feel the attention long before they could ever learn that the verdict was always going to be kind, where the first version became expensive. None of this began with a phone, and none of it began with you. Somewhere early, you lived in a place where sentences had consequences that outlasted them. Perhaps a house where a question asked the wrong way at dinner was still being referenced 2 days later. Perhaps a parent who quoted you back to yourself, accurately and out of context, in an argument you did not know you had entered. Perhaps nothing that would qualify as dramatic in any retelling, nothing you would ever report as damage, only a place where saying the thing plainly had gone badly enough times that plainness stopped feeling like an option. So that child built an instrument, and the instrument was linguistic. Every sentence drafted twice. Every request tested for the reading that could be turned against it. A permanent editorial layer installed between what was true and what was said, because the unedited version had once been expensive and the memory of that expense lived in the body rather than in language. Recognize what that instrument actually was. It was not a flaw, and it was not weakness. It was intelligence deployed under pressure, built early, refined by repetition, and it worked. The child who edited the sentence avoided the argument the plain version would have started. The child who delayed the answer until it was safe, bought a night without consequences. That is a genuine achievement, and it deserves to be named as one, because you have probably spent 2 decades describing it to yourself as a defect. That child learned one further thing, and it is the piece that matters most now. In that environment, spontaneity was the thing that got punished. The unguarded remark, the need expressed at the wrong moment, the enthusiasm that arrived too loudly. So the lesson was not simply to observe carefully. The lesson was that whatever emerges from you without inspection is dangerous, and that the unedited self is specifically the part that causes harm. That belief is still operating, and it is why sending an imperfect message feels less like a small social risk and more like a physical threat. But there is a limit written into the design of the instrument, and the limit is the whole problem. Something built to prevent harm cannot generate closeness. It has exactly one function, which is the reduction of risk. It can lower the probability of a bad outcome, and it can do absolutely nothing to raise the probability of a good one. Those are separate systems, and you were only ever issued the first. And a life optimized entirely for reduced risk arrives, eventually, at a strange destination. Very little has gone catastrophically wrong. You have successfully avoided most of the disasters you were built to avoid. And almost nobody is there. How delay becomes rejection. Take that one step further. because timing turns out to matter far more than content. Relationships move through small windows, and the windows are much narrower than they appear from the inside. Someone mentions in passing that they are struggling, and there is a period of roughly a day in which reaching toward them feels natural and unremarkable. Someone extends an invitation and there is a window in which saying yes costs nothing whatsoever. Someone carefully opens a difficult subject, testing whether it is safe, and there is a brief opening in which an honest answer would land as intimacy rather than as commentary. You are almost never late by years. You are late by 4 days, and 4 days is enough to change the meaning of everything you send. 4 days after a disclosure, your careful message arrives as a formality, a box being ticked, a courtesy rather than a movement toward them. 4 days after an invitation, your yes arrives as reluctance or as pity. 4 days after the difficult subject was opened, your honest answer arrives as a return to something they had already decided to drop, and now it is a larger conversation than they wanted, and they are braced before you finish the first sentence. Understand what makes the window close. It is not that they stopped wanting you inside it. It is that the need was real and the need got met. They told someone else. They took the other invitation. They found the reassurance somewhere it was immediately available. People do not hold a position open indefinitely for a response that has never once arrived on time. They go to the door that opens. There is a second effect, and it compounds. Each time your response arrives late, the other person learns something about the reliability of reaching toward you, and they file it. After enough repetitions, they stop bringing you the fresh things. You get the summary instead of the crisis. You hear about the difficult month after it has resolved, in a tone that suggests it was not serious, and you never learn that you were moved out of the category of people who receive things while they are still happening. That reclassification is silent, and it is almost never reversed. It is also the precise moment a close friendship becomes a warm acquaintance, and it happens without a single unkind word from anyone involved. This is why these losses feel so profoundly unjust. You did not refuse anyone. You never said no. You never withdrew your care or moved it elsewhere. You simply arrived, every single time, after the room had been quietly reorganized without you, and then read the new arrangement as further evidence of your own unlovability. The version of them you talk to. There is a stranger inside every one of your relationships, and you are the one who built them. Because you rehearse against an imagined reaction, you spend more of your time in conversation with a model of the person than with the person. Recognize what that model is made of. It was assembled early, from your own history, from the specific faces and moods that once held power over you. It is not a neutral simulation. It is more critical than the human being it represents, more easily disappointed, more prone to withdrawal, quicker to interpret a request as a demand and a need as a burden. It was built for a harder environment than the one you currently live in. So the sequence runs like this. You form something honest. You test it against the model. The model reacts badly, because reacting badly is close to the only thing it knows how to do. You cancel the sentence, and the actual person sitting 3 feet away is never given the opportunity to be kinder than your prediction. Count how many times someone would have responded well. Count the requests that would have been granted without complaint, the confessions that would have been received with relief, the boundaries that would have been respected immediately and without discussion, the questions that would have been answered with more warmth than you expected. Add the number of times someone was actively hoping you would ask. You will never know that number. Every one of those outcomes was overwritten in advance by a simulation you trusted more than the evidence standing in front of you. And here is the structural trap. Because the model is never tested, it is never updated. Every other belief you hold about the world gets corrected by contact with reality. This one does not, because you cancel the experiment before it runs, which means the prediction is never disconfirmed, which means the model retains full authority. It is still running today with the settings it received when you were 9 years old, issuing verdicts about adults it has never met, and you have been treating its output as knowledge of other people rather than as a memory of one house. There is a further irony worth naming. Your reputation for reading people well is deserved in one direction only. You are genuinely excellent at detecting mood, tension, and the small shifts nobody else notices. You are extremely poor at predicting generosity because the instrument was never built to detect it and has almost no training data. You catch every trace of coldness in a room and miss every offer of warmth, and then you call the result insight. You have spent a substantial portion of your adult life protecting yourself from people who are not going to hurt you. What happens when someone stops trying? There is a specific moment inside every one of these endings, and you were not present for it. At some point, the other person made a decision. It was not an angry decision, and it did not feel like an ending to them either. They simply noticed, on some unremarkable afternoon, that they had been carrying the relationship for a while. They were the one initiating. They were the one following up. They were the one turning a short answer into an actual conversation. And they got tired, in the ordinary way that people get tired, and they decided to stop carrying it for a little while and see what would happen. This is not manipulation, and it is not a trap laid for you. It is an ordinary human experiment that nearly everyone runs eventually, usually without admitting it to themselves. And what happened was nothing. Because your side of the connection lived entirely inside your head, the moment they stopped initiating, all visible activity in the relationship ceased at once. There was no residual signal. Nothing arrived to contradict their conclusion. The silence they received functioned as clean confirmation of the thing they had feared, which was that they had been the only person holding it the entire time. They did not know that you noticed the gap immediately. They did not know that you interpreted it within about a week, as evidence that they had finally lost interest, and that you then decided it would be undignified and intrusive to pursue someone who was clearly pulling away. They did not know that you drafted something in October and again in January. They did not know you were waiting for a version of yourself that would feel worth sending. Look carefully at what actually happened there, because it is not a misunderstanding in the ordinary sense. Two people were both waiting for evidence of being wanted, and both interpreted silence as its absence, and both withdrew to protect themselves, and both concluded that the other one had left first. The relationship did not end because either person stopped caring. It ended because neither one could see the other caring, and both treated invisibility as proof, so they ended it with real evidence. That is the hardest sentence in this video, and it deserves the discomfort it produces. The story they now tell about you is not a lie, and it is not unfair, and there is no version of the argument in which they are the villain. It was assembled honestly from careful observation, out of the only portion of you that they were ever permitted to see. The loyalty that nobody can see. Here is the loneliness underneath all of it, and notice that it is not the loneliness of being unloved. It is the loneliness of being profoundly loyal in private. You remember what people told you years ago, and you remember it accurately, including the details they have themselves forgotten. You track their difficult months without ever being asked to. You would drop almost anything if someone stated a need directly. You have defended people in conversations they will never hear about, corrected an unfair account of them to a mutual friend, thought carefully about what they needed, and then arranged something quietly so they would not have to ask twice. Almost none of it has ever been legible because most of it was expressed as restraint. You showed love by not intruding. You showed respect by not asking. You showed consideration by absorbing a cost yourself rather than distributing it. And restraint carries no signature. Nobody can read the name of the person who chose not to act. An absence of pressure is felt as an absence. Full stop. So you arrive at a strange biography, a person of genuinely extraordinary devotion, with a relational history that reads written down, like a long series of connections that faded without incident. The document does not match the life, and when you try to reconcile the mismatch, the only explanation available is that you must be exaggerating your own feeling, that perhaps you did not care as much as you remember caring, that the depth was something you told yourself about yourself. Sit with how much this arrangement resembles a defense because it is one. Invisible loyalty cannot be rejected. If nobody knows how much you care, then nobody can decline to care that much in return. And the terrible arithmetic of unequal love never has to be performed out loud. Restraint protects you from finding out where you rank. It also guarantees that you will never rank highly, because ranking is built out of visible acts. And there is a residue that accumulates. You have absorbed cost after cost, silently, and somewhere underneath the generosity, a quiet account is being kept. Not consciously and never stated, but present. Occasionally it surfaces as a flat tiredness around someone you love, or a strange reluctance to hear about their problems, or a small resentment you cannot justify and would be ashamed to name. That is the interest owed on an unmentioned debt. Nobody agreed to it, nobody can pay it, and it keeps growing. You know what you gave. Nobody else does. And somewhere in the last few years you began wondering whether something no one ever received was actually given at all, which is the question you have been steering carefully around for a long time, because you already suspect the answer. Precision as a substitute for presence. Be clear about what this mechanism is genuinely protecting, because it is not what it claims to protect. Getting it right is not the objective. Getting it right is the alibi. As long as the sentence is not yet correct, as long as the timing is not yet ideal, as long as there remains one more consideration to weigh, you possess a legitimate and even admirable reason not to be exposed. And exposure is the actual fear underneath everything described so far. Look at how well the arrangement performs. A perfectly worded message cannot be dismissed for being clumsy. A perfectly timed request cannot be refused for being inconvenient. And a message that never arrives cannot be rejected at all, which makes silence the only option in your entire repertoire with a guaranteed outcome. Precision allows you to feel diligent while remaining completely safe. It converts avoidance into effort, and that conversion is the reason this has been so nearly impossible to identify as a problem. You have never felt lazy in a relationship in your life. You have felt drained, vigilant, preoccupied, responsible, frequently overwhelmed. You have felt like the person doing the most work, and you have taken that exhaustion as proof of care, when a significant portion of it was simply the metabolic cost of hiding. There is a harder version of this to sit with. The carefulness also protects you from being known well enough to be evaluated properly. As long as people are receiving an edited version, any warmth they offer is warmth towards something you produced deliberately, which means it cannot be trusted, which means it does not soothe anything. This is why compliments have never landed. They were addressed to the draft. The unedited person, the one who might actually be reassured, has never been in the room to receive anything. Understand the distinction that dissolves the whole structure. Presence is not accuracy. Presence is being in the room before you know what you are going to say. It is arriving unfinished and letting another person watch you assemble the thought in real time, badly, with corrections. Everything you have built over 30 years was designed to prevent exactly that condition, which means the skill you have refined most is the precise opposite of the one the situation requires. That is why advice about relationships has never worked on you. You have not been failing at closeness. You have been succeeding, continuously and expertly, at a different objective that was set for you before you could evaluate it. What it costs to be understood. Too slowly. Add up the bill in numbers you can actually name, because vagueness has been protecting this arrangement for long enough. Count the friendships that required one message you drafted and deleted, and which are now simply people you used to know, whose lives you observe from a distance, and about whom you feel a specific ache when their name appears. Count the times you needed help, concluded the timing was wrong for everyone involved, handled it alone at real cost, and then quietly resented the people who never offered the thing you never requested. Count the relationships in which your honesty arrived so late that it landed as an accusation rather than a request, and the entire conversation became about the delay instead of the need. Count the number of times you have been described, by people who genuinely liked you, as hard to read. Count the opportunities as well, because this mechanism does not confine itself to friendship. The job you did not ask for, because the ask needed better framing. The room where you had the most useful thought and said nothing because it was not yet finished, and then watched a rougher version of it be spoken by someone else and treated as insight. The thing you wanted to make, still unmade, because it is not ready. Then count the version of you that other people are currently carrying around. Kind, thoughtful, somewhat private, a little distant, slightly difficult to reach, probably going through something. That description has followed you across jobs and cities and friend groups for 20 years, and you have never once contested it because you assumed it was simply accurate. It is not accurate. It is a description of the delay, not of the person. It is a portrait of a 4-day gap. Someone made a reasonable inference from the only data available and produced a picture of a mechanism rather than a picture of a human being, and that gap has been introducing you badly to everyone you ever wanted to know for years, in your absence, with your permission. The conversation you can still start. There is someone specific you thought about while watching this, not a category of person. One name which surfaced somewhere in the middle and has been sitting there since, someone who drifted without a rupture, whose absence you have explained to yourself as mutual, natural, the ordinary erosion of adult life, the thing that happens when two people get busy. You know the drift was not mutual. You know there is a message you have been composing for months, and that at some point the composition itself became the reason it remains unsent. The message does not need to be good. That is the entire point of everything described here. It needs to be visible, it needs to be early, and it needs to be unfinished enough that they can hear an actual person inside it. 2 clumsy sentences sent today outperform the perfect paragraph that arrives never, and they outperform it by a margin so wide that the comparison is almost absurd. Expect the resistance because it will arrive within seconds of the decision. There will be a very reasonable voice explaining that it has been too long, that they have moved on, that reaching out now would be strange and self-serving, and would place an awkward obligation on someone who did not ask for it. Recognize the voice. It is the same instrument that produced the silence, defending the silence, using the length of the silence as its argument. It has never once been tested against the actual person. It is not information. And notice what you are genuinely risking, which is smaller than it feels. The worst realistic outcome is a short, warm, slightly distant reply that does not restore anything. That is the floor. It is survivable, and it is honest, and it is dramatically better than the current arrangement, in which you carry the loss indefinitely while telling yourself it was mutual. You have spent years building an instrument for reading people so precisely that you never had to risk being read yourself. Give it credit. It worked. It kept you out of a great deal of avoidable pain, and it answered the house you were raised in exactly as that house required. It also kept you outside the rooms where the people you loved were waiting to find out whether you wanted to be in there with them. They were never angry with you. Almost none of them were. They were unsure. And unsure is not a verdict, it is a question, which means it was always answerable, which means for at least one of them, it still is.